winding down our final grant, and we're thinking maybe we don't need another grant, and we're trying to see what that looks like and how we sustain. There's a few pieces that are left that we have to figure out in order to sustain, but it's a possibility. So, yes, the money helps, but it can be done without the money too.
Yeah, and I think you make an important point that in so many ways you've built your operation to be sustainable, even when you have the very fickleness that can be a part of the funding cycles, which is clear why you guys have been able to continue, and not even just continue like the status quo, but actually expand what you're doing even with some of those challenges. And I think Kathy mentioned that you all do quite a nice job with collecting data and using kind of these data-driven approaches. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we've really been in the data since the beginning. A lot of times grants make you be, but then we really had a mindful moment where we sat down with our advisory council and said, what is it that we want to keep as far as data goes? And so we've been really good with that. It's helpful that the way our court system works, that I'm the primary judge in charge of all child welfare cases, because the hardest piece has been whether or not we can ever compare to a control group. Because the ethics of how you do a control group in a situation like this becomes very tricky. So what we end up doing is just looking at all cases with substance use disorder if we need to do comparisons. And we've been able to track, what cases are we missing? That's how we were able to do that equity work. But we have a lot of robust data on all kinds of data points, from prior removals to education levels, of course, what kind of substance use we're looking at, mental health diagnosis, whether parents were impaired themselves as children. We're able to do some recidivism as well, not just on the criminal side, but the civil family side if they get a new CPS case within a certain amount of time. Because again, I'm the same judge. And so I know who all my parents are, and I'm like, oh yes, you were in the program. And I'll send it over to my team to make sure we track that. So we do have a lot of robust data. One thing that we notice is some of our data, especially when we look at disparities with race equity, we track the parents more than we were tracking the children. And in the child welfare system, we track the children more than we track the parents. And we did notice when we look at the children level data, the disproportionality looks different also, because we have more children of color than we have parents of color, which is just the interesting makeup of more biracial and multi-ethnic people in our society. So that was kind of an interesting point to look at when we start pulling those comparisons. But we do data report outs at all of our advisory committee meetings, and we have those about quarterly. And anytime you want some data, just let me know. I can send it your way.
Well, I like what you said about how the data actually helped inform how to kind of adapt. And can you talk more about, I'm really curious, because we see some similar things in the area where there's these great specialty programs, but they're not necessarily aligned with the people who are most affected by those negative consequences. And there are some critical barriers to sometimes getting kind of disparate populations in. So I'm curious for you, like, what were some of the things that you think or have been able to show have been like the kind of the causes of those disparities in terms of getting racial and ethnic minority parents and children actually to be able to participate in the programs?
Yeah. So one was the requirement that we have to have some kind of family member available to take care of kids, right? So especially in Austin, there's very few people who are actually born and raised in Austin that are living here now. We have some, but the second part of that was the inequitable policies, practices, both from the criminal justice system and the child welfare system about family members that they do have and not approving them because of criminal history. So the court is able to say, I understand your policy, but the practice for me is that I want to know, if they have a family member who is here and available, tell me, child welfare agency, why you think they're not safe. And if that has to do with prior child welfare history, I want to know the details. I'm not going to just take your word for it. They have a previous CPS case, so that means that they are not eligible to be a placement. If it's because of criminal history, I want to know the details. How old was it? How severe were the charges? Because I already know my law enforcement system here is disproportionately arresting Hispanic and Black people at a discretionary level. They have the choice to ticket or arrest on certain charges, and they're arresting way more often. So I already know. So that's been one huge piece, is saying criminal history and prior child welfare history does not automatically prohibit a family member from being available to care for the child. The other is that people get so scared with our deadlines and our laws. And I said, well, it's not like we ever jump in a case and then forget about it. We have so many, cross-systems checks to make sure that if there is a deadline in place, that we follow the deadline and we work through a legal case the way we need to. But we are legal problem solvers. So if I have to, for a short period of time, for the safety of a child, do a removal so the child can be in foster care, someplace safe, while the mother gets her bed and treatment and is not literally under the bridge with the baby. And then once she gets into treatment, I'll dismiss the emergency removal. So we're doing this all in kind of like that emergency before it's confirmed that the Child Welfare Agency has temporary custody, just on an emergency basis. Then I can dismiss that, put the child with the parent in their treatment center, and then move forward with just court-ordered services and supporting the parent. Our prosecutor's office was very concerned about that. Well, that means if we ever have to remove again, that deadline reverts back to the very first time you did the removal. And I said, and that's fine. And we'll keep track of it, just like we keep track of every other deadline. And if we get close to that point, we'll do whatever we've got to do to adjust and work with that. That's what we do. We're legal experts, and we've got to work within the legal case and not be scared of it. And I think it helps being, board certified in child welfare law and knowing the law like the back of my hand, so I know the flexibility that I have within it. And of course, I'm like, if you don't like it, mandamus me or appeal me, and then I'll let a higher court tell me I can't do it. But I'm willing to do it. I'm not that proud where I don't, let someone else tell me I'm wrong. So far, we haven't had a problem. But that was a huge barrier because sometimes they didn't have anybody. I've been trying to advocate for some kind of respite, 1 to 2 week at the most, caregivers that don't require children to be removed and in foster care in order for those safe placements to take care of kids. And I'm still working on that because I think that can happen without me having to do a removal, because we have family and friends who are doing this. And I know that this may be a stranger, but if they are known to us as a system and as a court, the question is about payment. Are we going to pay them for this? And so that's the whole other piece of it. So that hasn't been figured out, but I think that will also help with the equity issues. Another thing has been, it's been two big things. One, the culture in which we discuss race, ethnicity, and systemic racism. So I've probably done 36 race equity trainings very specific to the child welfare law, and I keep saying it to talk about, one, when someone says something has happened to them based on their race, let's just listen to them and believe them. Let's start there. Let's say that we believe them. All right? And then let's make sure whatever steps we take is something they want us to do. We can't tell them that because you told me your caseworker or the investigator was racist, now I'm going to go, run this up the ladder. Maybe they don't want you to do that. So we need to be centered with the family. We know our family decision-making tools work, so we're going to do those family team meetings. That's part of the model in Texas every single time. And those meetings are to try and prevent a removal. At those meetings, my drug court services manager goes to explain the program. And the way in which we present the program, the way in which we talk to parents needs to change. And just because a parent says, I don't have a problem, or, is initially hesitant, or even, what I say is, I don't want you to come to me and say, this parent isn't eligible because they don't want the program, they're aggressive, they're uncooperative. I say, okay, now you're going into microaggressions. So check yourself about how you're coming to the parent. Know that you are the man. You're the man. You're a child welfare agency, and that's how they see you.
Right.
Understand what's happening in the community. There is a huge concern between systems, especially law enforcement, and child welfare. You get looked at like you're the police in a lot of these communities. So think about how you're coming to them, especially in this time. Change the way you talk. Change the way you listen. And change the way you talk about them as well. Remove those microaggressions and have a conversation. And if initially they're not having a come to Jesus moment, that doesn't count them out. and we can continue to have the conversation with them. Because what I was getting was, they say they don't have a problem, but their baby was born addicted to opiates. And so I'm like, well, obviously we know there's something